Got on my Maroon shirt. Got on my foundational Black American Maroon shirt. I know you got yours. You give us a little bit, we make it happen. Family, many of our movements, like I was talking about last week, when they gave black people brass instruments after the Civil War down in New Orleans, all of those leftover brass instruments were around. We got those instruments, dusted them off, and created jazz, which is still alive. It's still a multi-billion-dollar industry right now. We created a whole new music genre. You understand? You give us a little bit, we'll take that thing to the next level. Even music genres like the funk music movement that happened, that came out of black folks getting a little bit. When we look at the history of funk music, family, how did the history of funk music really get popping off, especially in the Midwest? It really got popping off in the Midwest, particularly in Dayton, Ohio. Particularly in Dayton, Ohio is where the funk movement really, really popped off. The funk movement got started really by James Brown, and when James Brown started putting the beats on the one, he started stripping the beats down and he started making all of the instruments percussive. So James Brown lit the fuse. And then on the West Coast, you had another group, Sly and the Family Stone, and they had a great bass player, our good brother Larry Graham, who's from Texas. Larry Graham, he had a bass playing technique. When he had a bass, he had to make up for not having a drum when he played for the church. He would play in a trio with his mother and some other people in the family, and the drummer dipped out, so in order to make up for not having a drum, he had to thump and pluck to make a bass sound, and the pluck was supposed to be the snare, okay? Larry Graham was the first person to play the slap bass, to slap a bass, to slap and pluck, okay? That was our good foundational Black American brother, Larry Graham, who's the uncle of Drake, by the way. But Larry Graham, when he did a song called Thank You for Letting Me Be Myself, for Sly and the Family Stone, that's one of the funkiest records made in 1969. That brother killed that bass. Boom, 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 bam, bam. Boom, boom, bam, bam, bam. Boom, 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 bam, bam. Boom, 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 bam, bam, bam. That was him playing the bass in a percussive manner. That brother took a little bit. He took what was given to him. Hey, I got this. I got a bass guitar. Now I got to make up for not having some of the other instruments. So I'm going to turn this thing into multiple instruments. You understand? But then the funk music genre was really cultivated heavily out there in Dayton, Ohio. Now, why Dayton, Ohio? Because if you look at Dayton, Ohio, you got so many funk bands that came out of Dayton. You had Bootsy. Well, he was Cincinnati, but it was right next to Dayton. And that's where James Brown went and got another backing band. When he fired his original band, he had to go out there to Ohio to get Bootsy and Catfish. There was a reason why he had to go out there to get Bootsy Collins and Catfish Collins and the rest of their group. He had to go out there because of the talent that was out there in Ohio. But you had Heatwave from Dayton, Roger and Zapp is from Dayton, Lakeside is from Dayton, Steve Arrington and Slave, they're from Dayton, the Ohio Players is from Dayton. You got a lot of hardcore funky groups out of Dayton. Lot of funky groups, Master Funk out of Dayton. Now, why Dayton? Dayton is very important because in the right during the Civil War, not Civil War, World War II, you know, there was a lot of jobs going in on factory jobs in Ohio and in Detroit. A lot of black folks were going to Detroit, and a lot of people were going to Dayton. They had a company out there. I forgot the name of the company, but the company was a subsidiary of General Motors. And this company in Dayton, they would make the electronics for the cars. And also they had a contract with the government too because of after the war and everything. So there was what was the name of that company in Dayton? Where my Dayton people? There's a company out there. Was it Delco? I want to say the name of the company was called Delco. All my Dayton people, if you live in Dayton or if you grew up in Dayton, probably a lot of your family members worked at Delco at one point. I think the company was called Delco, but a lot of black people were moving. Was it Delco? I think it was Delco. They were working at the Delco factory. A lot of black folks were working at Delco. A lot of black folks moved up to Detroit, which a lot of my family members did. That's why I was born in Detroit. A lot of my family members went to Detroit. They went to Ohio. They went to Cleveland, Toledo. That's where a lot of my family is now. Delco, that's the name of it. Okay, Delco, I know. That's what I thought. It was Delco. Is Delco still there? But yeah, Delco was a big factory at that time, and a lot of black people were moving up there to work for Delco. They were making electronic parts for cars and certain other things. So that was a big company, and black folks made a decent living up there. During the 1950s and 60s, black people got jobs and they were making a decent wage. So now you're making a livable wage. So now out here in Dayton, the property value is cheap. So now you can buy homes. And you can buy these homes and you can buy basements. Homes with basements. All right? And also, because you now have you have homes and you have disposable income, you can keep your kids out of the streets by buying them instruments. And then you can get your kids music lessons. All right? This is what was happening in the 60s. A lot of Delco is going right now. Okay, but what they were doing, these families, they got decent jobs. So now you can build a community. So now you got enough little disposable cash to get your kids some musical instruments now. Kids wanted musical instruments. So you can get them musical instruments. You can give them music lessons. And that's what you had all around Dayton, Ohio. You had these kids with musical instruments and they had basements in order to practice their music. So you had kids going from basement to basement practicing their music. Now, when I was living down in Birmingham, we had a carport, and we converted it into like a basement slash man cave for me when I was a kid. And we had our turntables in there. We had our break dancing linoleum. So if you had certain instruments and stuff, you could cultivate other talents. So yeah, people had pianos in the living room. You had guitars. So you had all of these kids with these basement bands. And then they started having battles of the bands. So they were cultivating. Yeah, I said Lakeside. They're from Dayton. So you had all of these groups with instruments. Their families could teach them music lessons and the whole 9 yards all over Ohio, but particularly in Dayton because of that, because of the Delco factory. So you had this movement going because of these black folks who now had access to just a little extra income. That's the point. They just had a little extra income and they created a whole movement. They created a whole funk movement. Yeah, Detroit too. Detroit too. Similar thing in Detroit. That's why all those groups were popping up in Detroit. All those groups were popping up. Detroit was the centerpiece of black music. You understand? Detroit was the centerpiece of black music. Everybody was going to Detroit to get down with the Motown sound because of all those groups out there. Yeah, Kool and the Gang, they're from Youngstown. Yeah, Ohio, they were funkin', man. All those Ohio bands. Yeah, and Midnight Star, they're from Ohio, right? I think they're from Ohio. You understand? The Ford Monica. So it was real out here. Oh, they renamed Delco Delphi. They renamed it. Okay. Yeah, the Ohio players were not a joke. The Ohio players were not a joke at all. And again, out of Detroit, you know, you had Parliament was going back and forth from Ohio and Detroit. That's where they were cultivating their funk sound. They got that funk sound. Actually, the funk came from Bootsy, to be honest. Remember, Parliament Funkadelic, their early records, they were kind of real out there. The early Parliament records were really, really space agey and trippy. They were kind of out there. they started getting down on the funk when Bootsy came in. When Bootsy came in and they started getting that mothership connection thing going, and Bootsy started teaching George Clinton about the one, putting the beat on the one, putting the funk on the one. And Bootsy brought that over from James Brown. He brought that to Funkadelic, Parliament Funkadelic. That's when they started getting hella funky. And then, truth be told, Earth, Wind, and Fire became a more polished version of Parliament. You look at Earth, Wind, and Fire, they were a more commercial and polished version of Parliament Funkadelic. Parliament Funkadelic, there was a bunch of dudes, basically a bunch of, spaced out dudes who's on acid, getting high and all of this stuff. Earth, Wind, and Fire, they took a lot of that stuff, a lot of the magic theatrics and all of that stuff that came with it, and then they cleaned it up. They cleaned a lot of it up. And if you notice, a lot of things too, there was a certain black consciousness in the funk music too. That's what made it really fly. There was always a certain level of black consciousness in funk music. We look at the Ohio Players. They always had these beautiful black sisters on the album cover showing their bodies, but it was always tasteful. Always had these beautiful sisters on the album cover. Parliament, Funkadelic, a lot of their stuff, if you look at it, but all the mothership stuff, that mothership stuff comes from Elijah Muhammad. Elijah Muhammad was talking about the mothership. And Parliament had a bunch of conscious stuff on their records. A lot of their stuff was seeped in black consciousness. Earth, Wind, and Fire. Remember, Earth, Wind, and Fire had all those pyramids. They would have African pharaohs on their album covers. Look at those old Earth, Wind, and Fire album covers, man. They were always about that consciousness, man. They always had those ancient Kemetic symbols on their albums, man. They always had a consciousness to their stuff. That's what made them funk so hard. That's what made it hit different, man, because you knew they were coming from a real place of consciousness, man. You understand? Yeah, Heatwave was the business. So yeah, they were always woke. There was a wokeness to that. Yeah, there was a brother named Sun Ra. He was out there, but there was a wokeness. Yeah, the Brothers Johnson too. Yeah, the Brothers Johnson, they were woke too. Yeah, these folks were ahead of the game, man. So yeah, real deep history.